You were told not to bother him. Do you understand me?" The voice was a shard of glass in the quiet afternoon, its sharp edges scraping against the limestone walls of the Sterling residence. Victor Sterling froze just inside the immense foyer, the heavy oak door clicking shut behind him. The sound of his own footsteps, usually a confident report of Italian leather on polished travertine, was utterly consumed by the venomous echo from upstairs. A pale, late-autumn Chicago sun slanted through the two-story windows, striping the floor with bars of weak golden light. In one hand he held a beautifully crafted marionette, a Pinocchio he'd found in a small Florentine workshop, its strings tangled in a delicate knot. He'd imagined his daughter's delight, but the smile he'd been wearing all the way from O'Hare simply dissolved. A cry followed the voice. It wasn't the playful shriek of a child's game or the frustrated wail of a toddler's tantrum. It was thin and brittle, the sound of something precious being broken. Without a conscious thought, Victor let his briefcase and carry-on drop to the floor with a muffled thud. He vaulted up the sweeping curved staircase, his heart hammering a frantic rhythm against his ribs. He didn't shout her name. He didn't want to give the source of that voice a warning. He just followed the sounds, his movements silent and urgent. He heard her then, her voice a fragile, broken whisper. "I only wanted to say hi to Daddy." He reached her bedroom door. It was slightly ajar, a sliver of light spilling into the hallway. He pushed it open. The scene inside shattered him. Lily was huddled at the far edge of her canopy bed, her small frame curled into a tight ball, knees drawn up to her chest. Her beautiful, coily hair, usually tied up in bright ribbons, was a disheveled halo, damp with a mixture of sweat and tears. Clutched in her hands was a floppy-eared, well-loved stuffed elephant. Standing before her, arms crossed tightly over her uniform, was Carol. The housekeeper had been with his family for nearly 2 decades, a fixture from a time before his success, before this house, before Lily. Her face, normally set in a mask of placid efficiency, was flushed a blotchy, furious red. "You don't get it, do you?" Carol sneered, her voice low and menacing. "This isn't a home for children like you. Little black girls don't live in places like this. They work in them." Lily let out a tiny, choked whimper. Carol took a step closer, looming over the child. "You actually believe you're his daughter? He doesn't love you. You're a project, little girl. A tax write-off with a good sob story to make him look like a saint to his rich friends. He'll get tired of this little game soon enough, and then you'll be right back where you came from." For a split second, Victor couldn't breathe. The world tilted, the ornate room with its designer furniture and soft pastel walls seeming to warp and twist around him. Then a cold, clarifying rage settled deep in his bones. He stepped fully into the room. Carol whirled around, a startled gasp escaping her lips. The color drained from her face, leaving it a sickly, pale white. "Mr. Sterling, I didn't realize you were home. What are you doing?" Victor's voice was unnervingly quiet. It didn't need volume. It was a blade of ice that sliced through the thick, poisoned atmosphere. She was being defiant, Carol stammered, her composure crumbling. "I was just trying to instill some discipline. She was going to bother you." Victor's gaze was locked on her, unblinking and merciless. "That child," he said, each word precise and heavy, "is my daughter." Carol's mouth opened and closed like a fish, but no sound emerged. He crossed the room in 3 long strides, his entire focus on the trembling figure on the bed. He knelt beside her. Lily's eyes, wide and red-rimmed and full of a pleading he never wanted to see again, met his. When he wrapped his arms around her, she latched onto him with a desperate strength, as if she feared he might dematerialize. "Daddy," she sobbed into his shoulder. "I'm here, baby girl," he murmured into her hair, his voice thick with emotion. "I'm here now. I've got you." He didn't look at Carol. He didn't have to. His voice was steady, absolute. "Leave this house. Right now. But, Mr. Sterling, my things, I've been with you for... Now, he repeated, the single word carrying the full weight of his authority. He reached over to the intercom on Lily's nightstand and pressed the button. Sam, come to Lily's room, please. Escort Carol from the property immediately. No discussion. See that she leaves with nothing but what she's wearing. The reply was instantaneous. On my way, sir. Carol stood frozen for another moment before scurrying out of the room, her head bowed. Her footsteps receded down the hall, a final fading sound of a long and trusted betrayal. Victor didn't move. He remained on the floor, holding his daughter as her small body was racked with shudders. I didn't want to make her angry, she whispered against his chest. She said I didn't belong here. She said you'd get tired and send me back. The words were like daggers in his heart. He looked around the opulent room, the shelves filled with books from his travels, the plush toys, the walk-in closet with its tiny designer clothes, and felt a wave of nausea. He had given her everything he could buy, but none of it had made her feel safe in her own home. He held her tighter, trying to pour all his love and reassurance into the embrace. Lily, he said, his voice soft but firm, look at me. I chose you. I didn't bring you home to be a part of a photograph. I brought you home because you are my daughter. You are my heart. And nobody in this world gets to tell you otherwise. If you've ever felt your heart ache for a child's pain, or if you connected with Lily's fear, take a moment to hit the like button, showing you're tuned in to the quiet voices that deserve to be heard. And feel free to share in the comments where you're watching from. It's a small world, and you might find a neighbor sharing this moment with you. But I'm not like the other people here, she murmured, her voice muffled by his shirt. He gently tilted her chin up so their eyes met. That's right, he said with a conviction that willed her to believe him. You're not. You are stronger, and you are braver, and you are more loved than anyone in this house could possibly comprehend. She didn't say anything more, just gave a tiny, almost imperceptible nod. Victor stayed with her long after the autumn sun dipped below the Chicago skyline, casting the room in shades of twilight purple and deep blue. He listened to the rhythm of her breathing as it slowly evened out, watched her eyelids finally flutter closed. Outside her window, the city lights began to twinkle to life. Inside, a father held his daughter, silent but resolute, knowing with a certainty that resonated in his soul that justice wouldn't be found in silence. From this moment forward, love would not be a distant concept or a delayed promise. Tonight, he would begin to set things right, not with the force of his wealth, but with the power of his presence. Victor didn't sleep that night. He spent the long hours in a plush armchair he'd pulled up beside Lily's bed, his hand resting gently on the small of her back as she slept. Her sleep was fitful. Every so often her breath would catch in a tiny hitched sob, as if she were wrestling with the day's demons in her dreams. Each time it happened, Victor would lean closer and whisper, "You're safe, sweetheart. Daddy's right here." When the first hints of dawn painted the sky in soft shades of gray and rose creeping through the silk curtains, he finally rose to his feet. His joints protested, his dress shirt was a mess of wrinkles, and his eyes burned from exhaustion. But none of that registered. The only thing that mattered was the steady, peaceful rise and fall of Lily's chest. He made his way downstairs, the silence of the grand house feeling different now, not peaceful, but heavy, charged with the memory of the previous day. He replayed Carol's cruel words in his mind, each one a fresh blow. You don't belong here. Little black girls don't live in places like this. He, Victor Sterling, had built this home from the ground up. Every stone, every beam, every pane of glass was a testament to his ascent from nothing. Born on the south side of Chicago, orphaned at 10, bounced between indifferent relatives until he struck out on his own at 17. He'd worked his way through the University of Chicago, bussing tables and coding on the side, before launching a logistics software company from his cramped studio apartment. He had transformed that fledgling startup into a global, multi-billion-dollar enterprise. He understood struggle. He knew what it meant to fight for survival. Yet, despite every obstacle he had ever conquered, he had somehow failed to shield the one person who mattered most from harm in her own bedroom. The kitchen was still and quiet. He opened the Sub-Zero refrigerator, the cool air a balm on his tired face, and pulled out eggs, bacon, and a carton of orange juice. He began to cook, his movements automatic, a form of meditation. The familiar sizzle of bacon and the aroma of brewing coffee slowly filled the cavernous space. It had been months since he'd cooked a real breakfast. His schedule rarely allowed for it, but today wasn't about routine. It was about resetting, about being present. He heard light, hesitant footsteps behind him. "Morning, Daddy." He turned, a genuine smile gracing his lips for the first time in what felt like an eternity. Lily stood in the doorway clutching the Florentine marionette he'd brought home. She was still in her pajamas, her feet bare on the cool floor. "Morning, sunshine," he said, his voice soft. "Are you hungry?" She nodded, rubbing sleep from one eye. He lifted her easily and set her on a stool at the massive marble island, then placed a plate of scrambled eggs and bacon in front of her. She stared at the food for a long moment before picking up her fork. After a few tentative bites, she asked the question that hung in the air between them. "Is she gone?" "Yes," Victor said, his tone leaving no room for doubt. "Carol is gone. She won't be coming back. She said this house doesn't want people like me." Victor put down his coffee mug and knelt beside her stool, so he was looking up into her face. "Lily, listen to me very carefully. This house, this home, belongs to you just as much as it belongs to me. Your beautiful skin, your amazing curls, your voice, your laughter, everything about you belongs here. You are not a guest in this house. You are the heart of it. You are family." She didn't reply, but her lower lip trembled. She set down her fork, reached out, and wrapped her arms around his neck, hugging him with all her might. Later that morning, Victor sat across from his chief of staff, Leo, in his home office. The room, with its dark wood paneling and views of Lake Michigan, usually felt like his command center. Today, it felt like a crime scene. "She's been with your family for almost 20 years, Leo said, his expression a mixture of shock and disbelief. "Are you certain about this, Victor?" "She emotionally abused my daughter," Victor stated flatly. "I don't care if she worked for me for 20 years or 20 minutes. She's finished. Handle the legalities. Severance, non-disclosure, the works." He paused. "And Leo, no press, no drama, just make her disappear. But I want full access to all household staff records. I want to see every complaint, every schedule change, every incident report, no matter how minor. Start with the last year." Leo jotted down notes, his pen scratching across the paper. "You think this was a pattern?" "I think I've been appallingly blind," Victor murmured, his gaze drifting toward the window. That evening, Victor did something he hadn't done in over a year. He instructed Leo to clear his entire schedule for the week. No meetings, no calls, no international travel. Instead, at 3 o'clock, he was standing outside the gates of Lily's private school. The moment she emerged from the building, her backpack slung over one shoulder and her curls bouncing, her entire face lit up in a way that made his chest ache. "You came?" she exclaimed, running toward him. "Of course I did," he said, taking her small hand in his. They stopped for gelato on the way home at a little shop in Lincoln Park. A double scoop of strawberry with rainbow sprinkles for her, a single scoop of dark chocolate for him. He sat and listened as she chattered about her art class, about how Mrs. Chen had let them use their fingers to paint landscapes. He found himself laughing as she did a perfect, goofy impression of her classmate, Noah. At one point she fell silent, swirling her spoon in the melting gelato. "Do you have to go away on another trip soon?" she asked, her voice small. "Not for a good long while," Victor said, meeting her gaze. A visible wave of relief washed over her. That night, as he tucked her into bed, Lily looked up at him with serious eyes. "What's going to happen to the other people who work here?" "What do you mean, sweetheart? Do they think the same way she did? Like Carol?" Victor sat on the edge of her bed, the question landing with unexpected weight. "I don't know, Lily, but I'm going to find out. I don't want anyone in this house to ever be mean to you again. I promise," he said, his voice a vow, "I will make sure this is a kind house. That's my most important job now, to protect you." She offered a sleepy smile, her small fingers curling around his. "Okay. Night, Daddy." "Good night, my love." He remained by her side until her breathing deepened into the steady rhythm of sleep. Back in his study, he poured a measure of bourbon into a crystal glass, the amber liquid catching the light. The full weight of the day was finally settling on him, heavy and suffocating. On the bookshelf behind his desk were photographs chronicling his professional life, ribbon cuttings, magazine covers, award ceremonies. One photo, however, stood out. It was a snapshot from the day he'd first brought Lily home from the adoption agency. She had been 5 years old, a tiny thing with enormous, watchful eyes. In the photo, her arms were wound around his neck like ivy. Her face pressed so hard into his shoulder she must have had trouble breathing. He hadn't fully understood her grip back then. He'd assumed it was just the nervousness of a child in a new, overwhelming environment. Now he saw it for what it was, the desperate hold of a child, terrified the world was about to crumble beneath her feet all over again. He picked up the framed picture and stared at it, a whisper escaping his lips. Never again. He set the photo down, picked up his phone, and dialed his head of security. "Sam, it's Victor. I need an internal review. Complete discretion. Every single member of the household staff, past and present. I want to know who is here for the right reasons and who isn't." Sam, a former Secret Service agent, didn't ask for an explanation. He simply replied, "Understood, sir." Victor leaned back in his leather chair, his eyes fixed on the ceiling as the night enveloped the house once more. But this time, the silence wasn't empty. It was the deep, indrawn breath before a storm. Victor stood at the expansive window of his home office, his hands clasped behind his back, observing the early morning sun stretch its golden fingers across the manicured backyard. The faint sound of Lily's laughter drifted up from the garden below. She was chasing bubbles, their iridescent surfaces shimmering in the crisp Chicago air before vanishing. He watched her for a long time, the pure, unadulterated rhythm of her joy acting as both a balm and a stark reminder. Only days ago, that same child had been trembling in her own bedroom, battered by a storm of hatred. His phone buzzed on the polished mahogany desk behind him. It was a text from Sam. "Security review is complete. 3 staff members have been flagged. Report and relevant footage are in your secure folder." Victor opened the encrypted file on his laptop, his jaw tightening as he began to read. 3 long-term employees had multiple, seemingly minor complaints lodged against them over the past year. The incidents, viewed in isolation, were subtle, easily dismissed. One of the gardeners had repeatedly referred to Lily as the rescue. A junior housekeeper had, on 3 separate occasions, redirected expensive birthday gifts sent from Victor's business associates, gifts clearly addressed to Lily, to a general charity donation pile without asking. The third, a more recent hire who sometimes served as a driver, had accidentally lost Lily's school art projects twice on the way home from school. None of these actions were egregious enough to warrant legal intervention, but taken together, they painted a disturbing picture. They weren't major transgressions, but they were not small things in the heart of a child seeking belonging. Victor felt that quiet, cold flame of fury ignite within him again. It was low and steady, more dangerous than a flash of temper. There was a sickness in his home. It wasn't loud or violent, but it was persistent and corrosive, like a hidden mold spreading within the walls, impossible to see until the structural damage was already deep. He didn't call a staff meeting. He didn't create a scene. Instead, he sat at his desk and composed 3 letters. They were personal, direct, and firm, yet masterfully restrained. Each letter informed the recipient that their services were no longer required, effective immediately. Each included a generous severance package, contingent on a signed non-disclosure agreement. He handed the sealed envelopes to Leo without ceremony. "Have these delivered before noon," he instructed. "Sam's team will escort them off the grounds. Quietly." Leo nodded, his expression grim. "And their replacements?" "I will personally review every new candidate," Victor replied, his tone resolute. "We don't just need employees, Leo. We need guardians." That afternoon, he picked Lily up from school again. She clambered into the back seat of the car, a messily constructed paper crown perched jauntily on her head. "I'm Queen Lily today," she announced with a wide, proud grin. Victor caught her eye in the rearview mirror and smiled. "Your Majesty." "To what destination does your chariot travel?" She giggled. "Home, please, my good sir." They chatted on the drive back. The conversation was light, easy. Victor didn't mention Carol or the dismissed staff members. He was determined to fill Lily's days with more than the fallout from adult failures. He wanted her to live her life looking forward, not constantly glancing over her shoulder at the past. After dinner, Lily asked if she could draw in his office while he caught up on some work. He set her up at a low coffee table near the window, giving her a fresh box of colored pencils and a stack of paper. She hummed a little tune to herself as she colored, her small feet swinging beneath her chair. At one point she looked up, her pencil poised over the paper. "Daddy, did you have a dad?" Victor paused, his own pen hovering over a contract. "No," he said quietly. "Not one that stayed around." "Oh, then how do you know how to be one?" He turned in his chair to face her fully, a soft, sad smile touching his lips. "Because I know exactly what it feels like not to have one." She blinked, processing this. "That makes sense," she said, with the simple, profound logic of a child. And just like that, she returned to her drawing of a purple dragon. Later that night, long after Lily was asleep, Victor walked the silent halls of his home. He moved slowly from room to room, and for the first time in years, he truly saw his surroundings. A faded photograph of him shaking hands with a senator, a dusty award for philanthropic excellence, a trophy case filled with plaques and lucite statues bearing his name. But there was no trace of Lily, no finger paintings taped to the refrigerator, no kindergarten diploma framed on the wall, no messy, vibrant artwork celebrating her existence. How had he been so blind? This house was a monument built to impress, but it had never been configured to hold a child's memory. He walked over to a large, abstract painting in the main hallway, lifted it from its hook, and set it carefully on the floor. The next day, he called a well-known interior designer. "I want to redesign the house," he said, his voice firm. "Not the architecture, just the soul. I want family photos on the walls. I want my daughter's artwork framed. I want soft colors, comfortable furniture, things that feel like a home, not a museum." The designer, initially confused by the sudden request from her famously private client, eventually grasped his meaning. She nodded, a gentle, understanding smile spreading across her face. "Mr. Sterling," she said, "by the time we're finished, it will feel as though she has grown up here from the very beginning." The transformation started slowly, one room at a time. Lily noticed almost immediately. "You hung my dragon picture?" she asked one afternoon, pointing to the messy watercolor now hanging in a beautiful frame above the living room fireplace. "It's a masterpiece," Victor said, his tone utterly serious. By the end of the week, there were plush toys in a basket in the living room. A cozy reading nook had been carved out in a sunlit corner of the den, and Lily's name was etched onto a custom wooden growth chart mounted near the pantry door. "This house looks different," Lily whispered one evening as they read a book together on the newly installed oversized sofa. "It's just catching up to you," Victor said, pulling the blanket over her. "You've been changing it all along without even trying." Lily tilted her head, considering this. Do houses have hearts? Only when the right people live inside them. She smiled and snuggled into his side, climbing into his lap. Outside, the sky deepened to indigo, and the first stars began to appear over the lake. Inside, for the first time in a very long time, Victor Sterling felt like he wasn't just managing a property. He was guarding a home, and he knew deep in his bones that whatever challenges lay ahead, they would face them together. Because Lily wasn't just a part of his life anymore. She was its undeniable, brilliant center. It was a rainy Wednesday when Victor first saw the folded piece of paper. He had come upstairs earlier than usual, carrying a mug of warm chamomile tea and one of Lily's favorite bedtime stories. Lily was in her adjoining bathroom, brushing her teeth, the sound of her soft, made-up humming drifting into the bedroom. A narrow strip of golden light from the bathroom spilled across the plush carpet. As he smoothed her comforter and fluffed her pillows, something slipped out from underneath one of them and fluttered to the floor. At first, Victor assumed it was one of her drawings. Lily was always sketching fantastical animals and imaginary castles, especially on dreary indoor days. But as he bent to pick up the small, crumpled sheet, his heart seized. He unfolded it. It wasn't a drawing, it was a list, written in the uneven, looping script of a child, using her favorite purple marker. Things I must not do. 1. Talk too loud. 2. Touch the fancy walls. 3. Ask too many questions. 4. Eat the last cookie from the jar. 5. Call Daddy when he is on a trip. 6. Cry. Below the list, in smaller, more cramped letters, she had added a chilling postscript. If I break these rules, she might come back, and Daddy might leave me. Victor didn't hear the water in the bathroom shut off. He didn't register the soft padding of small feet returning to the room. He was still staring at the list, the words blurring through a haze of disbelief and fury, when Lily appeared in the doorway. She froze, her eyes wide with panic. "You weren't supposed to see that." He looked up slowly, his expression a mixture of pain and profound sorrow. "Lily, where did you learn these rules?" Her gaze dropped to the floor. She began twisting the hem of her pajama shirt in her hands. "She made me say them," she whispered, "every day, before I went to school." Carol. The housekeeper's poison had seeped far deeper into his daughter's heart than he could have ever imagined. Victor moved to kneel in front of Lily, gently placing the list on her nightstand as if it were a toxic artifact. "Sweetheart, those rules aren't real," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "They are not yours to carry, not a single one of them." "But I don't want her to come back," she whispered, tears welling in her eyes. "And I don't want you to go away." His own voice cracked. "I will never, ever leave you, Lily. Not for being loud, not for asking questions, not for eating every last cookie in the world, not for any mistake you could ever make. You are my daughter, and you never have to do anything to earn my love. It's yours, always, just because you exist." She was quiet for a long time, her small face a mask of confusion and hope. "That's not what she said," she finally murmured. Victor's breath hitched. He pulled her into his arms, holding her close, trying to absorb her pain. "She was wrong," he said, kissing the top of her head. "She was so terribly, horribly wrong." That night, after Lily had finally fallen asleep, this time curled against his side like a fledgling seeking shelter, Victor sat awake, staring at that purple list. His mind was a battlefield of guilt and rage. The next morning he summoned Leo to his office. "I need to find a therapist," Victor said without preamble. "Someone exceptional with children. Someone Lily can trust." Leo raised an eyebrow. "You want in-house sessions?" "Yes. I want someone to come here twice a week. I don't want her to have to walk into a sterile office and feel like she's a problem that needs to be fixed." Victor hesitated for a moment. "And Leo, make sure it's someone who understands what it means to grow up as a black child in a world that doesn't always see your value." Leo gave a quiet, knowing nod. "I know exactly who to call first." By the end of the week, Dr. Eleanor Vance arrived. She was a woman in her 60s with kind eyes, elegant silver-streaked dreadlocks, and a voice that felt like a warm blanket. A retired child psychologist who had spent decades working with children of trauma, she had a rare gift for creating a sense of safety. Her first meeting with Lily wasn't an interrogation. It took place over tea and cookies at the kitchen island. There were no clipboards, no probing questions. Dr. Vance simply told stories about her own childhood, about a time she'd fallen out of a crabapple tree and broken her arm, and about her old dog, Franklin, who used to bark ferociously at squirrels, but was secretly terrified of them. Lily laughed. It wasn't a loud, booming laugh, but it was genuine. By their third session, Lily drew a picture for her. It showed a small lion cub sitting beside a very tall man in a suit. "That's me," she explained, pointing to the cub. "And that's Daddy." "He has very big hands," Dr. Vance observed gently. "To keep me safe," Lily said. When Dr. Vance asked about the expression on the lion cub's face, Lily grew quiet. "He looks scared," she finally said, "but he's trying to be strong anyway." Later that evening, after Lily had gone to bed, Victor sat in the living room with Dr. Vance. "She's beginning to heal," Eleanor said, her gaze compassionate, "but she is still carrying a great deal of fear, a fear she doesn't yet have the words to name." "Yeah." Victor stared into his untouched cup of coffee. "And what about me?" Eleanor smiled gently. "You're carrying guilt. That's a different kind of burden, Victor. And if you don't learn to name it and set it down, she will eventually believe she was the one who caused it." The observation struck him with the force of a physical blow. He walked upstairs and peeked into Lily's room. She was sound asleep, her breathing deep and even. The drawing of the lion cub and the man in the suit was on her bedside table. He sat beside her for a moment, gently brushing a stray curl from her forehead. In the quiet of that room, he made a silent promise. It wasn't a promise of grand gestures or material things, but a promise of presence. He would not only be the man who built her a fortress of a home, he would be the man who stayed inside it with her. And slowly, piece by piece, they would both learn how to feel safe again. Together. Victor stood before the hallway closet just outside Lily's bedroom, his hand resting on the cool brass doorknob. Weeks had passed since Carol's departure, weeks since Lily had started her sessions with Dr. Vance. The house had settled into a new rhythm, quieter, calmer, but not empty. Still, there were corners of the home that Victor had avoided, spaces that seemed to hold a residue of the past. This closet, situated right outside the sanctuary of his daughter's room, felt like one of them. He pulled the door open slowly. The interior was organized and tidy, filled with cleaning supplies, stacks of fresh linens, and a few large storage bins. At first glance, it was utterly unremarkable. But something, a flicker of instinct, urged him to look deeper. He crouched down, pulling out the bottom bin, then the one above it, until he reached a small, plain cardboard box tucked away at the very back, almost completely hidden behind a set of old paint cans. He knew instantly that it belonged to Lily, not because her name was on it, it wasn't, but because of the way it had been sealed with layers of mismatched tape, as if it had been opened and resealed many times. It was tucked away like a painful secret. He carried the box to his study and carefully sliced through the tape. Inside were treasures, a tangle of handmade plastic bead bracelets, crayons, stories scribbled in her developing handwriting, and a stack of drawings. One was a folded card that read in wobbly letters, "To Daddy from Lily, I love you even when you are gone." Beneath that, tucked at the bottom of the box, was another note. This one was on a crisp white index card written in Carol's severe perfect cursive. "Mr. Sterling, I found this box of things while cleaning. It appears to be trash from her room. I thought you should be the one to decide what to do with it." Victor's chest constricted. His hands clenched around the index card, crumpling it into a tight ball. Trash. That's what the former housekeeper had seen when she looked at his daughter's heartfelt creations. He took the entire box and carefully, one by one, laid out its contents across the vast surface of his desk. Each drawing, each scribbled story was like a breadcrumb leading back to a moment Lily had tried to share with him, a piece of her heart she had tried to offer, only to have it intercepted, dismissed, hidden away, and he had never known, he had never thought to ask. He picked up one of the beaded bracelets, turning it over in his hand. The elastic was stretched, but the green and yellow beads were still bright. It looked like something a child would make with a hopeful heart. That night, long after Lily was asleep, Victor stayed up, not working, but sketching out a plan. The next morning, he met with Leo. "I want every security feed from the past 6 months reviewed," he said, his voice hard. "I want to know about every blind spot, every offline camera, every glitch in the system." Leo raised an eyebrow. "Victor, that's a tremendous amount of data." "Start with the dates and times Carol was on duty," Victor specified. "Any time we see a gap in coverage or evidence of tampering, I want to know about it, immediately." "You think she did more than just yell at her?" "I don't know what she did," Victor said grimly, "but I am going to find out." 3 days later, Leo returned with a grim expression and a file folder. "We found something." Victor opened the folder. Inside were screenshots from various hallway cameras, each time-stamped. On multiple occasions during Carol's shifts, the camera feeds covering the hallway outside Lily's room would go black for periods ranging from 20 to 30 minutes. It was always in the afternoon, just after she would have gotten home from school, Leo explained. "We can't recover the missing footage, but the pattern is undeniable. She knew the camera locations. She knew how to create blind spots." Victor stared at the images, a cold dread washing over him. His hands began to tremble, not with fear, but with a deep, simmering rage. This wasn't just emotional abuse. This was strategic. This was calculated. Carol had systematically isolated his daughter, ensuring there were no witnesses. "She made it so no one could see," Victor murmured, more to himself than to Leo. He leaned back in his chair and closed his eyes, forcing himself to breathe through the anger. Reacting impulsively wouldn't help Lily. Acting decisively would. He picked up his phone and dialed. "Sam, it's Victor. I need a child protection consultant. Not a lawyer, a psychologist. Someone who specializes in the long-term impact of covert emotional abuse." "Understood, sir." That evening he sat with Lily in the den as she worked on a large jigsaw puzzle on the floor. "Can I ask you something, sweetheart?" he said gently. She nodded, her eyes still focused on finding a piece with a blue edge. "Did Carol ever tell you not to tell me things?" Lily didn't look up right away. She carefully placed a puzzle piece into its spot, then another. Finally she said, her voice barely a whisper. "She said if I told you things, I would ruin your important work. She said you'd have to fire people because of me, and it would be all my fault." Victor exhaled slowly, the sound a pained hiss. "None of that is true, Lily. Nothing you could ever say would ruin anything. And if someone needs to be fired to keep you safe, I would do it 1,000 times, and not lose a minute of sleep." Lily looked at him then, her expression searching. After a long moment she said, "Even if I break a rule?" "There are no rules about hiding your pain," he said, his voice thick. "There never should have been." She moved closer to him on the rug and leaned her small body against his. Later that night, Victor sat at his desk and typed a memo to the board of his philanthropic foundation. He wasn't just going to change the culture of his household. He was going to try to change the system. The next morning, he stood before the entire staff of the Sterling Foundation and announced a new multi-million-dollar initiative, Safe Voices. It would be a nationwide grant program designed to support school counselors, child advocacy centers, and anonymous reporting systems for children in domestic care situations. "This is not just about my daughter," he said, his voice ringing with a newfound conviction. "It's about every child who whispers their fears into a pillow at night, thinking no one can hear them. I hear you now. And we are going to make damn sure that others do too." There was a stunned silence in the room, followed by a wave of quiet, respectful applause. Victor didn't need a standing ovation. He needed action. And now, finally, he was ready to lead, not just as a CEO or a philanthropist, but as a father who had failed to listen and was finally learning how to start again. Lily sat cross-legged on the thick living room rug, her brow furrowed in concentration as she carefully threaded colorful beads onto a string. The late morning sun streamed through the tall windows, illuminating the dust motes dancing in the air and casting a warm, golden glow across the polished hardwood floor. Each bead was chosen with purpose. Red for courage, she had decided, blue for calm, and yellow for what she called Sunday days, days when she felt completely safe and warm. Victor watched her from a nearby armchair, a cup of coffee growing cold in his hands. He hadn't yet told her about the official launch of the Safe Voices Foundation. He hadn't mentioned the speech, the quiet media buzz it was generating, or the way the board had unanimously approved the massive pilot program. That wasn't what mattered right now. This moment, this simple, peaceful act of creation, mattered more than any headline. He stood up and walked over, crouching down on the rug beside her. "What are you making there?" "A bracelet," she said, her eyes still fixed on her task. "It's for Dr. Vance. Green is her favorite color." He smiled. "That's very thoughtful of you." "I like talking to her," Lily said softly. "She doesn't make me feel like I have to explain everything all the time." Victor nodded. "She's a very good listener." Lily added a final green bead and held the completed bracelet up to the light, admiring her work. "Daddy," she asked, her tone serious, "do you think people can change? Like, for real change?" It was a heavy question, delivered in such a small voice. Victor sat down on the floor beside her. "Yes," he said after a moment's thought, "I think people can change when they truly want to, and when they understand why they have to." She looked at him, her gaze direct and perceptive. "Did you change?" He didn't answer immediately. "I think I'm still changing," he admitted honestly. "Every time you trust me with a piece of your heart, I change a little bit more." That answer seemed to satisfy her. She carefully slid the bracelet off the string and placed it in a small velvet pouch. "I want to give it to her tomorrow at my session," she said. Victor gently touched her hand. "Can I come with you?" Lily looked surprised. "You've never come to therapy with me before?" "I know," he said, "but maybe it's time I did some listening too." The next day they arrived at Dr. Vance's office together. It wasn't a sterile clinic in a high-rise building. It was a charming craftsman-style home in a quiet neighborhood, with a flourishing garden out front and wind chimes that sang softly in the breeze. Inside, the living room had been converted into a warm, inviting therapeutic space, filled with bookshelves of picture books, soft blankets, and two comfortable, worn armchairs angled toward each other like old friends catching up. Lily proudly presented Dr. Vance with the small pouch. "I made this for you." Dr. Vance's eyes softened as she opened it and saw the bracelet. "Oh, Lily, this is just beautiful. Thank you so much." Victor sat down across from them, his hands folded in his lap. "I was hoping," he began, "that perhaps I could join for a few minutes today, just to listen." Dr. Vance nodded. "Of course, Victor." For the first part of the session, they talked about everyday things, a funny dream Lily had, a new coloring technique she'd learned, and the announcement of the spring play at her school. Then, Dr. Vance leaned forward slightly. "Lily, is there anything you wish your dad knew, but you're not quite sure how to tell him?" Lily looked down at her lap, her fingers tracing the pattern on her dress. "I wish—" She hesitated, her voice dropping to a whisper. "I wish he knew how many times I almost said something about Carol, but I was scared I'd ruin everything, like if I made him worry, then he'd have to leave his work, And then maybe he'd leave me. Victor felt a familiar, sharp punch to his gut. He forced his voice to remain steady. I never want you to think your feelings are a burden, Lily. I never want you to think they are too heavy for me to carry. That's my job, to help you carry them when you need me to. Lily looked up at him, her eyes shining with unshed tears. I didn't want to be extra trouble. I didn't want to be a problem. You are never a problem, Victor said, his voice thick with emotion. Not a single part of you is too much for me. Without another word, she crawled from her chair into his lap, pressing her forehead against his chest, as if to absorb the truth of his words. After the session, Dr. Vance walked Victor out to the porch. She is making remarkable progress, she said. But the most important part of her healing is already happening right here in your home. She is starting to believe you when you say she is loved unconditionally. I do, Victor said, his voice full of a depth of feeling he hadn't known he possessed. More than I ever knew I was capable of. That evening, back at the house, Victor opened a drawer in his study and pulled out the old crumpled list he had found under Lily's pillow weeks before. The list of rules she had written for herself, rules of silence, fear, and invisibility. He took a lighter from his desk drawer. He walked out to the stone patio beneath a sky full of stars. He held the piece of paper in his hand and lit one corner. The small flame caught, curling through each of the 6 rules one by one until the paper turned to black ash. He opened his hand and let the wind scatter the remains into the darkness. From the doorway, Lily watched him, her arms crossed over her pajamas. What was that? She asked. Just getting rid of something that doesn't belong to us anymore. She nodded slowly and stepped outside, slipping her small warm hand into his. The autumn wind was cool on their faces, but her grip was firm. And in that quiet, shared stillness, Victor knew this wasn't just a new beginning for Lily. It was a new beginning for him, too. Not as a savior or a CEO, but simply as her father. And finally, after a lifetime of learning how to build and conquer, he was learning how to just be one. Victor pulled his car into the school parking lot a full 10 minutes before the final bell was scheduled to ring. A gentle rain was falling, the drops tapping a slow rhythmic beat on the windshield. He hadn't picked Lily up midweek in months, not because he hadn't wanted to, but because the relentless demands of his foundation and his business had always seemed to consume every available hour. But things were different now. He was different. He now carved out this time, treating it as sacred, because it was. He stepped out of the car, popping open a large black umbrella, and walked up to the covered sidewalk just as the school's double doors burst open. A wave of noise, laughter, shouting, the squeak of sneakers on linoleum spilled out into the damp afternoon. Children poured out like a burst of confetti, some running into the waiting arms of parents, others clambering onto waiting buses. And then he saw her. Lily spotted him almost instantly, and her face lit up like a sunrise breaking through the gray clouds. "Daddy!" She ran toward him, her curls bouncing, her purple raincoat flapping behind her like a superhero's cape. He knelt and opened his arms, and she crashed into his chest, a bundle of damp, warm, joyful energy. He lifted her easily into his arms. "Guess what?" she said breathlessly, as he carried her toward the car. "Mrs. Adams picked me to read the morning announcements over the intercom next week." He buckled her into her car seat, a wide grin spreading across his face. "Oh, that's amazing, sweetie. Are you going to tell the whole school what's for lunch?" "Pizza and applesauce," she confirmed with a laugh. "But I think I'll also say something cool at the end, like be kind to each other, or maybe remember to use your quiet voices in the library." He chuckled as he started the car. "That's a pretty good motto for life." She nodded proudly. As they drove home, Lily hummed along to the radio, tapping her fingers on the armrest in time with the music. Victor couldn't help but watch her in the rearview mirror, marveling at the transformation that had taken place in just a few short months. The faint, persistent shadows that had once lived under her eyes had faded. Her shoulders were no longer habitually curled inward, as if she were trying to make herself smaller, to disappear. She was blooming right before his eyes. At dinner that night, Victor brought up an idea that had been quietly forming in the back of his mind. "Hey, kiddo," he said, swirling a forkful of spaghetti onto her plate. "How would you feel about inviting some of your friends over next weekend? We could have a little backyard get-together, just some fun games, maybe an outdoor movie night." Lily's eyes widened. "Here? At our house?" "Of course at our house. Maybe a couple of their parents could come too. We could string up lights in the trees, have all the best snacks, and you could show them your tree swing." She hesitated for only a second. "Can I invite Amara and Noah?" "You can invite anyone you want," Victor said. A slow, brilliant smile spread across her face. "Even Mrs. Chen from my art class?" "Even Mrs. Chen." The idea took on a life of its own from there. Lily immediately grabbed paper and markers and began designing invitations, each one featuring a cartoonish drawing of their house, with the sky full of smiling stars above it. Victor watched her from the kitchen doorway, a warmth blooming in his chest. This wasn't just a party. It was a declaration. It was Lily, ready to let people into her world again, on her own terms. The next few days were a happy whirlwind of preparation. Victor hired a small local catering team. Leo coordinated the rental of an outdoor movie screen and lighting. Sam, his head of security, did a thorough sweep of the entire yard and installed extra sensors on the gates, just to ensure Victor's peace of mind. Lily, meanwhile, was the official party planner, buzzing with excitement as she chose the perfect spots for balloons and curated a playlist of songs she loved to sing in the car. Victor let her take the lead on every decision. This wasn't about creating a perfect, polished event. It was about celebrating her ownership, her joy. When Saturday finally arrived, the backyard was transformed. It glowed under the soft, magical light of hundreds of tiny fairy lights strung through the branches of the old oak trees. A large projector was set up against the back wall of the house. Colorful bean bags and picnic blankets were scattered across the lawn. The air was filled with the irresistible scents of popcorn, mini hot dogs, and freshly squeezed lemonade. Guests began to trickle in, kids in bright hoodies and light-up sneakers, parents carrying containers of homemade cookies, teachers in casual denim jackets. The first time Maya introduced Victor as "my dad" that evening, he caught the tiny, almost imperceptible catch in her voice, a fleeting hesitation quickly covered by a confident smile. But it was there, and he understood it. Naming her love and her belonging out loud still felt like a risk sometimes. But each time she said it, the grip of the past loosened just a little more. Midway through the movie, Lily climbed into Victor's lap on a large outdoor beanbag and leaned back against his chest. "You're not working on your computer tonight," she whispered. "Nope. And you're not going on a trip tomorrow?" "Nowhere but to the kitchen for pancakes and cartoons." She smiled without looking up from the screen. "This is the best night ever." Victor kissed the top of her head. "Mine too, sweetheart. Mine too." As the movie played on and the stars began to blink in the dark sky above them, he looked around the yard at the laughter, the life, the light that filled his home. This wasn't just healing. This was wholeness. And for the first time in a very long time, Victor Sterling knew exactly who he was. Not the CEO, not the philanthropist, not the self-made success story. He was Lily's father, and that was, by far, the most important and profound title he would ever hold. The Sunday morning after the backyard gathering was peaceful and bright. Sunlight poured through the linen curtains of the breakfast nook, illuminating the lingering crumbs from the previous night's festivities. Victor stood at the stove, flipping pancakes, while Lily sat cross-legged on the wide marble counter, humming a cheerful, made-up tune. She was wearing his oversized Sterling Foundation hoodie, the sleeves so long they completely covered her hands, and her hair was still a bit wild from sleep. "Do pancakes taste better on Sundays?" she asked. sniffing the air with dramatic flair. "Only if you perform the official syrup dance first," Victor replied, without missing a beat, sliding a perfectly golden-brown pancake onto a plate. Lily giggled. "What's the syrup dance?" He gave her a playful shrug. "I don't know. You'll have to invent it." She hopped off the counter and performed an impromptu wiggling shuffle across the tile floor, ending with a flourish of jazz hands. "Ta-da!" "That was award-winning," he said, handing her the plate and a bottle of maple syrup. They ate together by the window, the quiet sounds of birds chirping outside, mingling with the occasional clink of their forks against the ceramic plates. The peace between them was real, deep, and hard-earned. But by early afternoon, the tranquility was shattered by a call from Leo. "Victor," he said, his voice low and tight, "you need to see this." Victor stepped into his office and shut the door. Leo sent a link to his computer. When Victor clicked it, a video began to play. It was an episode from a small, amateurish podcast, but the title alone made his stomach clench into a tight, cold knot, the truth behind Victor Sterling's adopted image. The screen showed a blurry paparazzi-style photo of him and Lily walking hand in hand down a city street. The host, a woman with a sharp, cynical grin, spoke over the image with a voice dripping with disdain. "You know what's truly pathetic? When these out-of-touch billionaires adopt children for PR points. It's the ultimate sympathy card. A poor little girl placed in a mansion where she clearly doesn't belong, raised by a man who has never once spoken publicly about why he really took her in." Victor slammed the laptop shut, his jaw clenched so tightly it ached. It wasn't the insult to him that fueled his rage, but the vile implication about Lily, that she was a prop, a decoration, that her very right to belong in her own family could be questioned by some stranger on the internet. He immediately called Leo back. "Do we know who is behind this?" "Her name is Layla Brenner. She's an online commentator, a right-wing shock jock type. She thrives on manufacturing controversy to grow her audience." "Is it getting any traction?" "Not yet. A few shares in some fringe online groups, but if it hits the mainstream..." Victor looked out the window at his backyard. The swing still hung from the old oak tree, swaying gently in the breeze. "I'm not responding with a team of lawyers," he said decisively. "Not this time." "Then what's the plan?" Leo asked. "I'm going to answer it my way." He hung up and walked back into the kitchen, where Lily was happily coloring on a placemat. "Sweetheart," he said gently, "how would you feel about helping me tell our story, the real story? About us?" She blinked up at him. "Like in a book?" "No, something shorter, more like a short video. Just you and me talking about what makes our family real." She tilted her head, considering it. "Would I get to pick out what I wear?" He smiled. "Absolutely." 2 days later, Victor invited a small, trusted production team to their home. The same people who had filmed promotional spots for the Sterling Foundation. There was no fancy setup, just a single camera, a soft light, and a microphone set up in their comfortable living room. Lily chose to wear her favorite T-shirt, which read, "I'm the boss," and Victor wore jeans and his oldest, softest flannel shirt. They sat side by side on the couch, Lily's feet swinging back and forth, not quite reaching the floor. The director, a kind woman named Sarah, asked softly, "What do you love most about each other?" Lily answered first, without a hint of hesitation. "I love that my dad always listens, even when I talk way too much. And he smells like coffee and safety." Victor swallowed hard against the lump forming in his throat, then smiled. "I love that Lily reminds me who I am every single day, and that she is braver than most people twice her size." The video was simple, unadorned, and deeply authentic. There was no background music, no slick graphics, just their truth. They posted it quietly on the Sterling Foundation's official social media page. By nightfall, it had 200,000 views. By the next morning, it had over 1 million. The comments poured in from all over the country, an overwhelming wave of support. This made me cry. Thank you for showing the world what real love looks like. Watching from Ohio, and I just want to say, this child is so blessed, and so is her dad. As a foster mom, this gives me so much hope. One comment, however, stood out to Victor. It read, I live just 3 blocks from you. I didn't know your story. Now I do. If your daughter ever wants to play with my daughter, we would be honored. He showed the comment to Lily. A slow, shy smile spread across her face. That afternoon, Lily and her new friend Camilla covered the driveway in chalk art, bright rainbows, lopsided hearts, and stick figures of 2 little girls holding hands. Victor watched them from the porch, a mug of coffee in his hand and his heart feeling impossibly full. Dr. Vance visited that evening. She's glowing, she observed, watching Lily run inside to get juice for her and Camilla. And you, Victor? How are you holding up? Victor let out a long sigh. I expected the backlash, but the love, that caught me completely off guard. Dr. Vance nodded. That's the thing about truth, Victor. It doesn't always have to roar. Sometimes it just stands quietly in the light and lets people see it for themselves. Victor looked out at the fading sunlight. I didn't adopt Lily to make a statement, he said softly, but maybe our story can be one. A story of what? She asked. He smiled. Of what it looks like when love decides to show up and stay. A week later, Victor stood behind the heavy velvet curtain of a small auditorium in Atlanta. It wasn't a high-profile press event or a corporate gala. It was a community gathering organized by a local youth center, a celebration of foster and adoptive families. The Sterling Foundation had quietly sponsored the event, but Victor hadn't originally planned to speak. That was until that morning, when Lily had looked up at him with eyes that held a wisdom far beyond her years. Can you tell them what you told me? She'd asked. About why you chose me? He had nodded, though a small, anxious part of him still feared the weight of that public vulnerability. But now, as he peeked out at the crowd, a diverse mix of parents, children, social workers, and mentors, he felt something other than fear. He felt a sense of calling. The host's voice echoed through the speakers. Please give a warm welcome to Mr. Victor Sterling. A gentle wave of applause rose as he stepped onto the stage. There was no fanfare, no flashy suit, just a man in a rolled-up dress shirt and jeans holding a folded piece of paper he had no intention of reading. Hello, he began, his voice calm but resonant. I'm not here today as a businessman. I'm here as a father, a deeply grateful one. He paused, his eyes scanning the faces in the crowd. A few years ago, I made a decision that fundamentally changed my life. I adopted a little girl. I didn't do it because I wanted to be seen in a certain way, or to make a statement, or to be anyone's hero. I did it because I met a soul who made me realize my own life was missing a piece I didn't even know was gone. A hush fell over the room. I was not prepared for how much I would have to grow, he continued, his voice raw with honesty. I was not ready for how deeply I would have to examine my own shortcomings. But my daughter Lily, she made me better. Day by day, mistake by mistake, laugh by laugh, he smiled gently. She taught me that love isn't about what you say in public. It's what you do when no one is watching. It's staying present when it's inconvenient. It's showing up again and again. It's listening when your own heart is too tired to speak. And sometimes it's just holding a child's hand, even when you're not sure you're strong enough to carry the weight of their past. The room was utterly silent. He could see tears glistening in many eyes. I didn't save her, Victor said softly, his voice thick with emotion. She saved me. And I know there are people in this room who know exactly what that feels like. When he stepped down from the stage, people approached him, not with business cards, but with hugs, with shared stories, with words of thanks. An older man gripped his hand and whispered, I raised 3 foster sons. Never heard anyone say it quite like that. Thank you. That night, back at their home in Chicago, Lily was waiting up for him. She was curled on the couch, a blanket wrapped around her shoulders. "Did you tell them?" she asked. "I did." She nodded, as if she already knew the answer. "Were you nervous?" "A little." "Did you cry?" He laughed. "Almost. I knew it." They spent the rest of the evening eating popcorn on the couch and watching old cartoons. But sometime before midnight, Lily sat up, suddenly serious. "Can I ask you something big?" "Always." If something ever happened to you, would I have to go somewhere else?" Victor turned to face her fully, his heart giving a painful thud. "No," he said firmly, his gaze unwavering. "If anything ever happened to me, I have already made sure that you would stay with people who love you, people who know you, who understand everything you've been through. You will never be alone again, Lily. Not ever." She looked relieved, though a shadow of that old fear still lingered in her eyes. "I just don't want to go back," she whispered, "to that feeling, like I'm invisible." "You are the most visible person in my entire world," he said, pulling her into a hug. "And I promise to spend the rest of my life making sure you always feel seen." Later that week, a letter arrived at the Foundation's office. It was handwritten with no return address, but the penmanship was neat and clear. "Mr. Sterling, I watched your video. I judged you before I knew your story. I was wrong. My own son came out of the foster care system, and sometimes I forget how hard his journey must have been. Watching you and your daughter reminded me that love is something that is learned and that we are all still learning. Thank you." Victor read the letter twice, then carefully tucked it into his briefcase. The story he and Lily were building together was reaching people, quietly, deeply, not in headlines or boardrooms, but in kitchens and schools and living rooms, just like theirs. At Dr. Vance's next session, Lily brought her a new drawing. It was a big red heart with 2 stick figures inside, one tall, one small. "This is me and Daddy," she explained at Seek, "and the heart is our house." Dr. Vance smiled. "It looks like a very full heart." "It is," Lily said, "but there's room for more." "For more what?" "For more people," Lily said matter-of-factly. "We could help another kid, right, Daddy?" Victor, who had been sitting quietly in the corner, raised his eyebrows in surprise. She turned to him. "Maybe not right now, but someday. We could make our house bigger on the inside." He was quiet for a long moment, his chest full of an emotion he couldn't name. "Yes, sweetheart," he said, his voice thick. "When we're ready, we'll make room." And in that instant, an unspoken understanding passed between them. It wasn't just about adoption anymore. It was about growth and healing and legacy. Lily, who had once been a child afraid to speak too loud, was now dreaming of giving someone else a voice, and that, Victor knew, was the most powerful and beautiful echo of love he had ever heard. The gentle spring sun shone across the Sterling property, casting long, soft shadows from the magnificent magnolia trees that dotted the expansive lawn. Victor stood near the garden, a spade in his hand, his jeans smudged with soil, with Lily by his side. Today was a special day. They were planting a tree. It wasn't just any tree. It was a young oak sapling they had carefully chosen together the week before at a local nursery. Lily knelt beside the small hole they had dug, clutching the paper tag that had come with the tree. It read, "Quercus alba, white oak, a symbol of strength and endurance." "Is this like the one you used to climb when you were a little kid?" she asked, her eyes wide with curiosity. Victor chuckled. "Not quite. The one in my old neighborhood was a lot more crooked, and it had a tire swing that was probably a lawsuit waiting to happen." She grinned. "This one is going to be perfect." Together they placed the sapling into the rich earth, Lily steadying its slender trunk while Victor carefully filled in the soil around its roots. When they were finished, they stood side by side, their hands dirty, the cool spring wind in their faces. "We'll get to watch it grow," Victor said softly, "year by year, just like us." Lily looked up at him, her expression thoughtful. Will it still be here when I'm big? It will be here long after that, he assured her. Maybe even when you have kids of your own one day. She smiled at the thought, then fell quiet. Do you think, she said, her voice barely a whisper, that the people who hurt me before, do they ever feel sorry? Victor's hand stilled. He took a moment to wipe his palms on a towel before crouching down to her level. I don't know, sweetheart, he said honestly. Some people do, and some people don't. But what matters most is that you don't have to carry their shame. That belongs to them. It's not yours, she nodded, blinking away the hint of a tear. I think I used to believe that I was hard to love. Victor pulled her into a fierce, protective hug. You are the easiest thing I have ever had the privilege to love, Lily. They stayed there for a while, the breeze rustling the new leaves on the trees around them. Later that week, Victor received a message from a longtime contact at the Illinois Department of Children and Family Services. They were hosting a roundtable summit focused on child trauma, post-adoption support systems, and community healing. They didn't just